In the bustling brothels of Athens, a night with a woman could cost no more than 2 barley flatbreads, or even less than a jug of cheap wine. These women, called pornai, were at the bottom tier of prostitution, a term that reduced them to mere objects of chatter and transaction. Court speeches by figures like Dio and Lysias suggest that pornai often served 6 to 10 men a day, earning barely enough to buy a small portion of lentils. Meanwhile, the brothel owners grew rich, with part of their earnings flowing directly into the city's treasury through taxes. Athenian law imposed no minimum age for entering prostitution. Archaeological evidence and historical records reveal that girls as young as 10 to 13 were exploited in these establishments. Each enslaved girl bore a permanent brand on her thigh, burned into her skin with hot iron, marking her as living property. Life inside these houses was brutally harsh. If a girl refused to work, she could expect horrific punishment, public whippings, starvation for days, or worse. The arrival of a new girl was marked by a particularly cruel ritual, and she would be assaulted in full view of other women and regular patrons. An account from a man named Pappy of Thessaly claimed this was deliberately done to crush her spirit and extinguish any hope of escape. Onlookers often jeered and laughed. Turning the suffering, men would pay 10 times the usual price to be with someone untouched by previous harm. Writers of the time described such transactions casually, as if purchasing fresh fruit from a store. Privacy did not exist. Women worked in corners of large rooms, separated only by filthy cloth or mats. Every cry of pain was part of the background noise, a form of entertainment for men waiting their turn. Before we uncover more of these buried stories of pain and resilience, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to share the voices of those who were silenced in life. Owners of these women often sorted them into disturbing categories: Nubian women, exceptionally short women, those who could not speak, women who fought back, and those still considered unbroken. Each group came with its own price tag and its own clientele. 5th century art even depicts competitions in which men would attempt to overpower a resisting woman purely for amusement. Graffiti found on brothel walls shows that some customers paid extra for the privilege of inflicting severe harm, slashing faces, leaving scars, or permanently maiming them. Violence was marketed like any other commodity. Some women were advertised specifically for punishment: split lips, shattered teeth, burns from tipped oil lamps. These were injuries that certain men sought out deliberately. To them, a woman's agony became a form of art, her screams a drunken melody. In the same city that celebrated philosophy and drama, cruelty against women proved to be one of the most lucrative trades. Yet even the daily brutality paled in comparison to what occurred during religious festivals. During certain celebrations, especially the festival of Dionysia, prostitutes were handed over to groups of men for free as part of what was framed as a sacred ritual. Surviving accounts describe these scenes without a hint of shame. Groups of intoxicated men assaulting women while music played, wine flowed, and bets were placed on how long the victim could endure. On these days, a woman's last shred of dignity vanished. She became nothing more than a plaything for the crowd. Medical notes from the period record deaths from internal injuries, suffocation, and massive blood loss. Priests claimed such acts honored the gods. Wine and the blood of abused women mingled on the altar, their dying breaths reframed as prayers for abundant harvests. When the festivals ended, those still breathing were dragged back to the brothels to resume work. The dead were discarded beyond the city walls, their bodies thrown into ravines like refuse. These ritual atrocities were simply an extension of the violence women endured daily. Constant beatings with sticks, leather straps, or bare fists, devising sadistic games at the women's expense. For the slightest infraction, a spilled drop of wine, a misspoken name, or even the simple act of shedding a tear, a woman in an Athenian brothel might be condemned to days of solitude in a pitch-black cell, deprived of both food and water. At times, the punishments escalated to unimaginable cruelty. She could be bound to a stone pillar in an open courtyard, left to shiver in soaked rags through the bitter cold of winter nights, or bake under the scorching summer sun without a single drop of water. This brutal ordeal was cynically labeled by their owners as character correction, a chilling euphemism from this chapter of dark history. Any object within reach, wooden clubs, heavy wine goblets, even the dull end of a knife, became an instrument of discipline for any act of defiance. Over time, the women learned to conceal their agony behind hollow smiles, knowing that tears or cries would only incite their masters to greater acts of violence. In a city that celebrated the perfection of the human form in its art and sculpture, the bodies of these women became living testaments to brutality, covered in bruises, burns, and scars. Should a woman dare to flee, the law viewed her not as a soul seeking freedom, but as a thief, guilty of stealing property from her owner. The consequences were both vicious and public. Fugitives were frequently branded with searing, hot iron on their forehead or chest, a permanent mark of their supposed betrayal. The court records from this period reveal an even grimmer dark history. Some recaptured women were nailed to wooden planks and put on display in the city square, serving as a terrifying warning to others. Death from dehydration or from septic infections festering in their wounds was a common outcome. In their desperation, some women sought refuge in temples, prostrating themselves before the altars, hoping the gods would offer protection. But the priests, frequently corrupted by bribes, would return them to their owners for a modest fee. In this world, property rights held more weight than divine mercy. The runaways were dragged away in chains, their blood staining the sacred steps of the temple, stains that were quietly scrubbed clean by other enslaved people at dawn. Every failed escape only invited more severe retribution, as Athenian justice possessed countless methods for crushing a woman's spirit, all while ensuring she remained functional for her trade. Yet, even this utility was devalued in a market where new women were so readily and cheaply available. Medical texts from the era grimly note that few of these women survived beyond their mid-20s. The causes of their early deaths were as relentless as their daily existence. Rampant venereal diseases, infections from neglected injuries, and sheer, utter exhaustion compounded by the cumulative damage of malnutrition and constant abuse. Women with festering wounds, foul discharges, or open sores were not taken out of service. Instead, they were compelled to continue working until their bodies physically gave out. The owners viewed medical care as a pointless expense. A replacement girl was cheaper than a physician's consultation. Customer complaints about the smell of decay and blood were answered with beatings for the woman, as if pain itself could miraculously heal dying flesh. Modern archaeological digs near the ruins of ancient brothels have unearthed truly chilling evidence, female skeletons revealing severe pelvic trauma from coercive encounters and childbirth, alongside skulls fractured by blunt force, ribs that were broken and had healed incorrectly, and spinal deformities resulting from years of physical strain. All these bones serve as a silent testament to the systematic violence of this dark history. When a woman became too ill to be profitable, she was discarded without a second thought, carried outside the city walls, and simply left there, regardless of whether she was still alive. In Athens, the very city that championed ideals of beauty and proportion, the bodies of these women were disposed of like broken pottery. Pregnancy was not seen as a natural life event, but as damage to valuable property. The punishment for becoming pregnant was both swift and brutal. To prevent births, owners forced them to consume toxic concoctions, or subjected them to blows to the abdomen, or made them lift impossibly heavy weights until they miscarried. Ancient medical texts detail horrific methods for terminating pregnancies: herbs that induced violent sickness, scalding oil introduced into the body, or sharpened implements used internally if the pregnancy could not be otherwise stopped. Childbirth occurred on the very same squalid straw mats where patrons were served. There was no medical assistance, no sanitation, and no midwives present. Countless women succumbed to fatal hemorrhages or post-delivery infections. Archaeological digs have unearthed the minuscule bones of infants, callously discarded in the drainage channels, and refuse piles behind these ancient establishments. The practice of ending a newborn's life was shockingly commonplace, particularly if the child was a girl or fathered by another slave. For many of these women, this was perceived as the only possible act of compassion, a way to spare their child from the same horrific fate. A truly grim chapter in Athens' dark history, where these women were not even legally human. They were ensnared in a system of manufactured debt for basic necessities, a debt that spiraled daily with exorbitant interest and arbitrary penalties. Denying a client, even one with a reputation for brutality or perilous requests, was simply not an option. The very idea of consent was a concept the law completely denied them. Surviving court records from the period speak of women who bravely attempted to seek justice for their abuse, only to find the entire system rigged against them. In the very society that pioneered democracy, A slave's testimony against a free man was inadmissible unless she was first subjected to torment to verify her truthfulness. Half of the population, its women, was completely shut out from this democracy, with enslaved women relegated to the absolute lowest tier of society, valued less than farm animals, which, at the very least, received regular food and shelter. And yet, in the rarest of instances, a woman might catch a fleeting glimpse of something more, a faint possibility of rising, even slightly, above the crushing misery. Sometimes, through the favor of an affluent patron who might purchase her freedom, or from an owner who saw a new source of profit in training her as a skilled musician or dancer for more exclusive entertainment. But for the overwhelming majority, such opportunities never materialized, and the merciless cycle of exploitation churned on. On occasion, a woman could ascend from the common ranks by becoming the personal favorite of her master or a powerful benefactor. In such a scenario, she might be granted a private chamber, adorned with exquisite jewelry and clothed in fine silks instead of rough wool. However, these so-called privileges were merely the decorations on a gilded cage. A favored woman knew all too well that her status was perilously fragile, resting entirely on the capricious whims of a man who could, at any moment, cast her back into the crowded brothel, or even have her life ended for the slightest insubordination. Historical accounts reveal a chilling practice. These favored women were often used as mere tokens of hospitality. A master might offer one of his consorts to a visiting friend for an evening's entertainment, having her return the next morning as if she were nothing more than a fine wine goblet, loaned briefly to a cherished guest. Even at the apex of this grim social ladder, a woman remained mere property, her body an object, her worth calculated in currency. Golden chains bound her just as securely as iron shackles. But beauty and youth are fleeting, and whether a woman was a common slave or a prized mistress, the passage of time would inevitably erase her value in the eyes of her owners. The final chapter was always identical, a nameless death, followed by a deliberate erasure from history. This final act of cruelty, a chilling element of their dark history, meant they were denied proper Greek funeral rites. Their bodies were hauled beyond the city walls and left abandoned in ravines or tossed into shallow, unmarked pits in defiance of sacred tradition. They were refused tombstones, any inscriptions, or memorial offerings. Even if a woman gained her freedom, the stigma of her past made her a pariah in respectable society. These former slaves were completely barred from civic life, forced to exist as living ghosts, physically present but socially erased, as if their lives had never mattered. Modern archaeology has uncovered their remains mixed among broken pottery and piles of domestic trash, providing grim evidence of a final resting place that perfectly mirrored their perceived value in society. Less than human. No markers, no names, no memory. In a civilization that immortalized its heroes and kings in epic poetry, the stories of these women were allowed to simply vanish, their suffering too ordinary to be worthy of remembrance. However, this cruelty was not merely one of omission, it was woven into the very fabric of their entertainment. Comic playwrights like Aristophanes consistently depicted these women as crude, lustful beings, worthy only of ridicule and violence. Within Athenian theatres, entire crowds would roar with laughter at staged scenes of sexual assault, brutal beatings, and public humiliation.